Alex Kidman, and today I'm taking a look at the Games Legends Flashback console. Now, I'm a bit of a sucker for all things retro gaming, and I spotted this, in fact, in my local Kmart today. I was in there to buy a bike pump, and this jumped out at me from the shelf, mostly, of course, because it's got Bubble Bobble on it. And look, I'm a bit of a sucker for Bubble Bobble, but I'd hope I'm not too much of a sucker. And I say that because Games does not have that great a reputation. You probably know them for those Mega Drive and Atari consoles they used to do, those flashback units. And look, to be kind, they were mediocre, I guess. There were all sorts of issues with the emulation, with the sound. They were very, very cheaply built. And while they got better over time because they started putting more and more games into them, they still were not spectacular. So, look, I'm not expecting a whole bunch out of this. It was 99 bucks, which is on the okay side for a mini console. I guess it's about what you pay. That's 99 bucks Australian, by the way. And it promises me that it's got 100 games. Now, what's really interesting about that? Well, there's two things, and I'll show you the back, because the back's kind of interesting, and I don't know how much of this will come in. I might grab a quick photo of this to make it a little bit more clear. But typically, with these kinds of consoles, what you get is they are mini consoles. So they're like the mini SNES, or the Mega Drive Genesis Mini, or TurboGrafx, those kinds of things. They're very dedicated to a single system. This really clearly isn't. There's a whole bunch of games on there which are very, very clearly Super Nintendo titles. There's a couple of ColecoVision games. I'm presuming, because I haven't actually plugged this thing in yet, that the version of Bubble Bobble on there is probably going to be the NES version. Not so sure. But some of the licensing that Games must have done for this, it's going to be really fascinating. I mean, obviously, Disney's getting a whole bunch of money because there's Aladdin and Lion King, Fix It Felix, and Star Wars games on there as well, including some really quite playable games in their SNES original format that I'm quite keen to get playing. I do own some of these games still already, but there is a convenience to these small form factors. So let's open it up and have a look. Now, I'll say this, the box is really light. You're not getting a lot physically for your money, I'm pretty sure. You're not getting a lot that's all that heavy. All right, so we open it up, and yeah, there's not a whole lot there. So I'll pull the console out, and wow, I mean, that is a really light, nondescript little box. Looks like an HDMI switch or something. But there's a couple of things that I note with interest about this. So first of all, you've got your standard, is it DIN 9, DIN 8, something like that? The standard kind of control plugs that you get, for example, on a Sega Mega Drive or Master System, or even an old school Atari. I will have to try and dig out some of my older control pads and see if those will work with it. At the top, we have simple buttons, which simply just say on, off, and menu. I'm guessing the menu is probably going to be a reset or a move to a reset to access all of those titles. At the back, we have micro USB for power. That's very, very predictable. We only have HDMI. Look, honestly, I prefer that, but your mileage may vary. There's also an SD card and slot, and I must say I was not expecting that. It opens up the possibilities for adding other titles of questionable legality, shall we say. I'm not going to get into that too much. But yeah, this is very light, obviously very, very cheaply built. Let's put that down for a second. Then we come to the controllers, which are sort of tangled together. One thing, actually, which I will note is, while there's power supply, controllers, and a manual in there, there is no HDMI cable. So you are going to have to budget extra for that if you don't already have a spare HDMI connector, because there's no composite or S-video or other connectors out of there. Okay, these are similarly very light, very basic. I mean, obviously that design is kind of classic Sega Saturn, more or less, but a bit lighter. That control pad is really, I don't know if you can see how much movement there is on that, but I'm not confident that's going to be a great control pad. Buttons are okay. I mean, just at a touch level. Obviously, I'll have to see how they actually control. Now, obviously, the next thing I need to do is plug this in, and to do that, I will actually transfer over to the full screen menu version, because you don't really need to see me anymore, now do you? So here we are at the main UI, and I'm immediately slightly surprised, and pleasantly so. I was kind of expecting one of those Famiclone, here's just a list of things, ugly UIs, and you don't get that. You get a bit of art, you get featured games, and they're featuring Bubble Bobble, which is obviously the best game on the system because it's Bubble Bobble. But my own bias aside, there's one thing that absolutely everyone who buys one of these should do, in fact must do, when they first fire it up, and that is disable the background music. It's truly, truly hideous, awful digital garbage. Look, I'll show you, okay? So I'll go down to settings and go across to the background music, and don't say I didn't warn you. Good God, that is just awful. I mean, it's just, I don't know what they were thinking. I really don't. The little clicks it makes when you move around are okay, but yeah, that's just wrong, and it must die. Okay, so, well, what about the games themselves? Well, here again is where I was rather pleasantly surprised, because I was thinking, as I said, that it's just going to be a bunch of awful Flash games and then a few things that they've licensed. That, for example, Bubble Bobble was going to be the NES version. I would prefer the Master System version. That is clearly the superior version of that game. But it's not. It's not the Master System or the NES version. It is instead the actual arcade version. I can play a near enough arcade perfect version of Bubble Bobble through this thing. That's worth my money. I'm kind of sold already. Now, that being said, there are some challenges. The controller is not very good, as I suspected. It's pretty light, it's pretty floaty. It'll get the job done, but the good news there is that I'm currently playing this, in fact, just on a very generic 6-button Mega Drive pad that I've had since the 1990s, and it's working beautifully. So it will use those standard connected control buttons if that's what you want to do. And if you've got one, I'd certainly encourage you to do that. The basic controllers will work, but almost anything else will be better. I should probably stop playing Bubble Bobble though, because I can play this game all day. It's reasonable enough emulation. I don't know what the emulator is, but it works just fine. And of course, it's not the only arcade title on there. There's a real mixed bag of things on here for arcade games. Some you'll love, some you won't. Some are very obvious multi-pack. So the Namco stuff, for example, is very obviously off a 6-in-1 board. So if I fire up, say, I don't know, how about Gallagher, or Gallagher 88, actually. I've never played Gallagher 88 in the wild, although I have played a little bit of PC Engine version. As you can see there, it's off a 6-in-1 board. It's very, very obviously off a 6-in-1 board. Now, it will flash up from time to time, these kinds of things, so no save, no load, no rewind. It's just not built into whatever emulator they're using. But the load speeds are okay. Every once in a while, you'll hit a load percentage. I still haven't quite worked out if that's just it freeing up memory or the actual individual games requiring it. It's not entirely clear, but it's not too onerous in the main. And yeah, look, it's Gallagher 88. I'm okay at this game. I enjoy it. It's a lot of fun, but I'm certainly not the best player of it ever, as you can see. But look, I can certainly have some fun with this game, and again, the arcade emulation is okay. The one thing I'll say is I'm listening to this and playing this through a fairly ordinary kind of monitor. I'm not going to say that At Games has cracked its issues with audio, because maybe they haven't, and I'm just not hearing that. But for the intended market, for that market of, hey, let's be a stocking stuffer, gift for the retro gaming fanatic in your life kind of thing, yeah, look, this is alright. This is basically just fine. Now, is everything on here a stone-cold arcade classic? Well, no. There's a real grab bag of games here from quite a few makers from back in the arcade era, including a bunch of stuff that's been on some At Games collections before, and indeed, I should say, there's a whole bunch of different versions of this Legends Flashback console out there. Some with 50 games, some with 100 games, some with Street Fighter. This one doesn't have that. It doesn't appear, by the way, that there's a firmware upgrade for this. That is apparently what the SD card slot is for, but from looking at the At Games site, they don't appear to have a firmware upgrade for this particular console. People have hacked them because, of course, people are people. Let's have a look at, say, bowling here. I've never played this game before in my life. Not big on bowling, to be honest with you. So, and look, there we go. There's the load screen in action. I don't know why this particular game might need loading. That splash screen didn't look too complicated, and well, let's give it a try. Let's give it a try. This could be my next great passion. But looking at that, I'm going to put this. I doubt it. I have my serious doubts, in fact. It's okay, I guess. If you like bowling, maybe this is your favourite game, of course. And I suppose that's the point, that these systems don't necessarily have to have everyone's all-time classics, and the licensing on that would be prohibitive. You might have played and loved this to bits as a kid. I don't love it, I'll be honest. But, look, it's there, it's fine. But so we've got arcade games, and then we've got console games. And as I said, I thought that this system was just going to be a collection of SNES ROMs, let's face it, it's an emulator, and ColecoVision games, and then maybe a whole bunch of janky Flash games. It's not quite that, though, because actually there's more than just that. And let's pick an example here. And this was the first one that really surprised me, and that was Aladdin. Now, if you know Aladdin as a console game, you're probably aware that there are two versions. There's the version made by Capcom for the Super Nintendo, and that's a fun enough game. It's kind of cool in places. It's not the best version of Aladdin, though. That very, very much is the Mega Drive version, or Genesis, if you're an American. I was expecting this to be the SNES version, because it's got Super Star Wars, it's got some stuff that's clearly SNES only. But in fact, that ain't the case. And if we load it up, we get to see that really, really clearly and really, really quickly. Because that is the genie from the start of the Mega Drive version. Now, they've done something sneaky here because the Sega logo is nowhere present. Obviously, they haven't licensed that. They've just paid, I'm guessing, Disney the money for the rights to this particular game. But, oh, what a game it is. This one really does stand the test of time. This is one of my favourite 16-bit platformers, bar none. Now, I'm keeping my cartridge, but I can say, having played an awful lot of the cartridge, yeah, this plays quite a good version of this game. I'm really not spotting too many flaws or errors. It maintains that proper 4:3 aspect ratio, and I love that. So many of these clone consoles and emulated consoles and cheap things you can buy go, oh, right, well, you're playing on a modern TV, everyone's going to want that 16:9 and stretch to buggery. This doesn't do that, and it's so much better for it. It's just absolutely spot on. Top work here. Now, you can do some other interesting things. This allows for save states on most of the console games. It'll tell you if it doesn't. But it also allows for in-game rewinding. Again, that's another emulatory feature. And we've seen that on some of the other official consoles. You can do that on the NES Mini, for example. Nice to see it here, and potentially useful if you are stuck with a really tricky bit. This remains a great game, and again, I should probably stop playing it because I can play this one all day long too. So let's jump over to the SNES titles, and here I'm playing Super Star Wars. I've got to hope I don't get a copyright strike for the music on this one. I guess we'll see. I mean, the music for a 16-bit game was amazing at its time. Obviously, it's a little bleepy bloopy now, but it's still, you know, that recognisably Star Wars music. This game is still hard as nails, and I wouldn't have it any other way. It is one of my favourite Star Wars games, and you get all three of them on this particular console. But there's a bit of a challenge here, and I'm actually going to jump forward a bit in this game. So I'll just pause the recording because I want to see how it deals with the Mode 7 stuff that this does. Because obviously, for an emulator, that's going to be a bit tougher. Just bear with me for a second. And there we go. One big tricky section dealt with. One what should be flying towards the Jawa cruiser, if I remember correctly, the Sandcrawler. Yep, here we go. Okay, let's have a look at how that does. Ooh, a little bit of jumpiness, little bit of stutter there. Now, some of that might be my capture card, to be honest with you. But, and some of that might be the age of the hardware. Look, that's all right. I would need to put it side by side with the original to work out whether or not that was any worse or better than the original. It's certainly not unplayable in that state. But again, I've really got to stress, this is one of those things that I don't think the die-hard must-have 100% pixel-perfect crowd are particularly going to race towards, if nothing else, because of that game's reputation about this stuff. But for a pick-up-and-play kind of experience, albeit a rock-hard one, yeah, look, this does just fine. So look, final thoughts here. Is this worth $99? Actually, I think it is. There's a really interesting kind of potted history of gaming going on here, and some more obscure titles that you just don't see in other formats. Certainly those Super Star Wars games, for example, are never going to get licensed to another thing in terms of real cartridges and so on again. There's some games which I'm, not loving as much. Switchblade here is, shall we say, pretty ordinary, or it seems to be pretty ordinary to me. But again, it's one of those things with retro gaming where perhaps this is somebody's favourite game ever, although in the case of Switchblade, I sort of doubt it. But look, at the price and for the market they're targeting, which very much is more that kind of slight nostalgic gamer rather than hardcore retro gamer, because if you're a hardcore retro gamer, you probably still own your original consoles. This is fine. It's not stunning, but it's fine. There's enough here to keep me happy for a good long while, and let's face it, I've already admitted that I'll be perfectly happy just playing Bubble Bobble all day long. Anyway, That's my take on it. Have you got one of the many variants of this particular weird little at-games console? Keen to know more about it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe.